episode 127 of Below the Belt. Quick turnaround. Obviously, we did the one with Flav and T on Sunday, but it's obviously a very, very busy week in boxing, so we thought we'd do another one. We're recording on Tuesday, so if anything happens between now and Thursday, Friday when I put this thing out, apologies that we missed it. But I'm joined today by my good friend Paul Zanon. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good, Cal. I'm good. Raring to go, and always honoured to be asked to go on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. We're honoured to have you. So it's been a busy week, and I thought we'd start with kind of like the hot topic of British boxing right now, which is the... I need to get this right, because Amir Khan is the A-side in the fight, which stood out to me. Amir Khan versus Kell Brook, about 5-6 years overdue. What's your response to that fight finally being made?
Yeah, you know, there's almost a category of boxing now, which is the coulda, shoulda, woulda beens, and then the ones that happen way too late. And this is one of them, you know, like the Pacquiao and Mayweather fight. I remember being ringside when Kell Brook fought against Hector Saldivia in the Sheffield Arena, and he stopped him in 3 rounds. And not long before that, they'd both been on TV, and it was the whole sort of who schools who thing. And I remember asking Kell Brook, you know, based on that performance, who schools who? And he was like, you know, he was adamant he was going to just sort of beat the stuffing out of Khan, and that was that. That's when it should have happened, sort of around the 2012, 2015 sort of mark. That was when it would have been a dynamic fight. But whether it was a case that there wasn't enough money there, I don't know. I don't think either one are scared of fighting each other. But they're both very shrewd businessmen, Khan especially. So, but hey, it's here now. I can't imagine. I'm saying I can't imagine there's a belt on the line. I'm sure some Mickey Mouse trinket or 7 is going to suddenly pop up out of nowhere. A WBC Sheffield Miners belt or something. I don't know. Suddenly sort of comes to the forefront. But you know what? It's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. Kell looks like he's carrying a few extra chins at the moment. So he's going. I'm not sure what weight at the moment they're looking to fight out. Hopefully not the obese category, because Kell's looking a little bit flabby. But you know what? Kell shrinks down, and when he does, he's absolutely ripped. There's a lot of muscle underneath there. The man hits hard. Let's see what they've both got left in the tank. You know, this is basically it. I don't know what they're going to be fighting for, like retirement oyster cards or something. You know, something to do with retirement in some way. But yeah, listen, we've had it before. Domestic fights, no world titles on the line, and they can be absolute corkers. So you never know. This could be an enduring classic, or it could be an absolute waste of time. But hey, at least it's happening than not happening. A debate is being solved. As long as they can meet in the ring. The fight ain't happening yet. The fight ain't until the first bell goes. Now both standing in the ring. The fight ain't happening.
It's one of those, yeah, I think that's a valid point. Yeah, until we see them ring walk, until we see them ring walk, then it's almost hard to believe that it is happening. They've had a press conference and they've had the stare down, so it feels very real. It's going to be contested at a catch weight of 149 pounds. So Kell Brook's managed to get a couple of pounds out of Amir Khan. I did think maybe have it at 150. Because it's not for neither of them are anywhere near world title level. It doesn't really matter about being on championship weight. I don't think neither of them are going to box for a world title again. It feels like to me that this is a one last payday for them both. I don't see any of them doing any. I could see them both retiring after this. It's interesting actually. You something you said about there's the woulda, shoulda, couldas, but until they box, we don't know who the better man is, and that's always something that's interesting to me. You think about, Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns not having the rematch until it was far too late. Obviously, you mentioned Mayweather Pacquiao, that being far too late. But at the end of the day, it's the result that matters. It's who wins on the night, regardless of when the fight takes place. So yeah, 149 pounds. I think that's fair. Maybe would have given Kell Brook another pound, but I don't think it really matters. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are poo-pooing it, but what I would say is it was on Sky Sports News all day yesterday. The timeline was lit up talking about this fight yesterday. It's not the fight it was, but it's still a big fight for British boxing. And I think kudos to Sky and Boxer for being able to get it together. But thinking about their primes, obviously we'll probably preview the fight, in more detail closer to the time. But thinking about their primes, if it would have happened in their prime, say 2012 or 2015, who would you have fancied?
I mean, the first things first would have been at what weight would they have fought at? Because Brooks always been fighting at the heavier weight, and he's campaigned at heavier weights. When he fought against Golovkin, that was 160. Admittedly, it was a double jump up in weight there. When he fought against Spence Jr., it was around 147. Crawford was 147. The fight before that, he was at sort of 153, 154. So he's naturally been the heavier man throughout his career. It's tough to say. I'd say Amir at his peak was a very, very swift operator. The way he fought against the likes of Madonna and people like that. And to be honest, even when he was fighting against Canelo, I actually thought he was winning the fight at the time, and then bang, he gets hit by an almighty punch, and he's done. Yeah. But Canelo does with everyone. He catches up with him. He computes a way to sort of work into their defense and then take him out. But I would have had to give it to Amir Khan as long as he would have stayed on his feet. Because Brooks, not the fastest of movers, he's a very clever counter puncher, and he's got a lot of power in there. But I would at this weight, let's call it 147 or somewhere between 140 and 147. But that would have been at 147. Brooke wouldn't have fought any less than that. I'd have had to give it to Khan.
Interesting. That's interesting, because I think you make a really valid point. Khan at his best was a 10 stone, 140 pound fighter, wasn't he? He was a light welter. He went to welter. He won a WBC silver belt. He had a good win over Devin Alexander at the weight. But other than Louis Collazo, I was at the Louis Collazo fight. That was in Vegas on the Mayweather Maidana undercard. And yeah, I think at his best, he is a 140 pound fighter. I think if they would have met at welter, I think I probably would have picked Brook to catch him at some point and get him out of there. I think he might have stopped him. But yeah, it's interesting that we both look at it similar, but would pick different guys. Yesterday, I put out a snap poll, just a quick snap poll. Who do we fancy on the night? And it was very, very close, very close. I think it was just towards Brook. But our friend Colin Howard always sends in a lot of questions. Said he made a good point. He said, Brook's just been stopped off of a jab by Terence Crawford. His punch resistance gone. There's an argument that Amir Khan never had much of a punch resistance, but that's why I'm not angry at this fight. Because if you put a fresh guy in with a shot guy, I'm mad at that. But we've got two guys that they're shot to bits, aren't they? But they're both big names, and so it feels like whoever lands first is going to be the winner. And with the speed aspect, it could be Khan. Who do you fancy to win it? Just now, we'll probably talk about it closer to the time, but just give us your gut feeling right now.
Judging by the look at Kel looking a little bit inflated, I'm going to go with Khan. Of the two, if you look at Kel Brook and who he's lost to, if you look at their biggest losses, these two, they're gutsy as it comes, and both of them massive sets of balls on them. I mean, to go in against the Canelos and the Golovkins, and both of them going in against the Terence Crawfords, etc. And in Kel Brook's case, Errol Spence Jr. They've gone in with some serious firepower. This fight's not going to be about that. I mean, Brook is the harder hitter of the two, but he's not a Golovkin, he's not an Errol Spence Jr., and he's not a Terence Crawford in terms of the way that they operate. So, it's. Like I said, I'm making a real presumption, and just based on the face-off that we saw yesterday. Kel looking a bit chubby at the moment. If he's able to trim down and get himself in immaculate shape and cut the weight perfectly, then great. We're going to have a real 50-50 fight on our hands. But this far out, I can only go based on that, and that's it. Ahmed doesn't look like he needs to shed stones and stones.
Yeah, Khan looks in better shape, and you're right. There's that. I thought that yesterday. Kel Brook was being interviewed. I think it might have been by Boxing Social, and the chin, the extra chin really stood out to me. He does look big. He's big at the weight anyway. He's big at welter anyway. So I think. Do you know what? I was picking Brook just because I think, as I said before, I think he'll clip Khan and that'll be it. But what Colin said has made me think again. It's made me think. But it almost feels like who lands first, because they're both punch resistance wise. It feels to me like they're both gone. And you kind of think Khan would land first because he is the quicker man. He is better in the earlier rounds than Brook. So it's actually quite. I know people are going to shit on it, but it's actually quite an intriguing fight. You know, in terms of the landscape of boxing, I don't think it means anything at all. So yeah, I think I'm actually starting to lean towards Khan. But I suppose we will talk about this again in February, Paul. We will definitely talk about it closer to the time. Before we move on to this weekend's fights, I've got a couple of more. Who do you think? I hope you've got BoxRec open because I do. If you're looking at it and just thinking off the top of your head, who has the better legacy, Brook or Khan? Of the two fighters. Both single weight world champions. Brook at welter, Khan at light welter. Both have fought top names. It's tough. I think probably Khan.
Yeah, I'd go with Khan. I mean, it was the boy from Bolton at the age of 17 went from getting silver at the Olympics. Everyone expected great things from him. Mentally, he had to come back from a devastating loss against Breeders Prescott, which you can almost make a comparison there against like with Teofimo Lopez. Totally different levels, obviously. With Lopez being the holder of all the belts, and Amir was on his way up, and then he starts getting back in the mix. He moves up from 135, starts delivering at 140. And then he has a success there. Beats the likes of stops Zab Judah, stops Paulie Malignaggi, beats Marcos Madana, all solid fighters. And then obviously gets a devastating knockout against Danny Garcia. So I know it sounds silly, but you almost look at the losses as well, and both fighters have got their biggest losses are against huge names. You've got Amir who's got losses against Canelo and Crawford, and you've got Kell Brook who's got losses against Crawford, Errol Spence, and Golovkin. And all very, very respectable in our own right. If I have to go overall, I'd say Khan. If you look at the caliber of fighters he's fought, like you mentioned before, against the Chris Alexanders and even Algieri as well, still very a solid fighter, and Colazzo, as you said before, Luis, Julio Diaz, Carlos Molina. I'm gonna go with Khan.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Khan. I think Brook. Obviously, he was WBO mandatory for a long time when he was with Frank Warren, but that was when Manny Pacquiao was champion. So Manny Pacquiao didn't have to fight mandatories. He was Manny Pacquiao. He was drawing a million pay-per-view buys against Josh Clottey. Like, he was jumping up and down divisions. He was doing whatever he wanted to do. So Kell Brook never got that fight. He moved to Matchroom, became IBF mandatory, won the title against Sean Porter away from home, which is a brilliant win. Sean Porter has shown, he's recently retired, and we spoke about it recently, that he became almost a gatekeeper, but to the elite, not a gatekeeper in the traditional sense. I would say he was that guy. If you beat Shorter, you were an elite fighter, and when Kell Brook beat him, that was a fresh kind of Sean Porter. And then he kind of ended up on the IBF mandatory thing and couldn't get that kind of unification fight against Jesse Vargas fight that was spoken about quite a bit with Kell Brook. He never got when he was kind of world champion. When did he win the world title? He won the world title in 2014. So Floyd was WBC WBA champion around that time. So Floyd, again, just like Manny Pacquiao, doesn't have to do anything or do whatever he wants to do because he's Floyd, and same with Manny Pacquiao. So I think he kind of sat on that IBF mandatory thing until the Golovkin fight, and the Golovkin fight was the worst thing he ever did, and he went downhill from then. You look at Amir Khan. I always divide Amir Khan's career into two sections. There's before Danny Garcia and there's after Danny Garcia. So, like you said, he comes back from the Breeders' Prescott loss. He wins a world title against Kotelnik. He defends it. Like you said, unifies with Judah. He unifies with Judah. I thought he got jobbed against Lamont Peterson. I thought that was bullshit. I thought the referee was terrible. The stuff about pushing. When do you ever get a point deducted for pushing? It does not happen. And he got 2 points deducted by the Washington DC official. And when do they have? I don't think they've had a world title fight in Washington since then. And then he lost to Danny Garcia. And for me, it always felt like once he lost to Danny Garcia, he lost his ambition. He would talk. And I did the long-time listeners will remember me making the Highlander comparison with Amir Khan. Think about Highlander, the film. For people that don't know, it's about immortals, and they fight each other, and when they kill the other one, the only way they can kill them is by chopping their head off. And when they chop their head off, they soak up all their power. And for me, Amir Khan, his focus became like Highlander. He thought, if I beat Floyd, I'm Floyd. If I beat Pacquiao, I'm Pacquiao. If I beat Canelo, I'm Canelo. He didn't. I felt, for me, after Garcia, he stopped wanting to beat the people at his level. He didn't want to fight Keith Thurman, Sean Porter, a rematch with Danny Garcia. He didn't want to beat those guys that were the gap, Berto, the guys that were the kind of the guys to get to Floyd. He wanted to just get to Floyd. He just wanted to get the Floyd fight because I'm Amir Khan and I'm a big draw. And so, for example, he beat Devin Alexander. And everyone's like, well, he should get the Floyd fight. Well, 6 months later, Floyd fought Manny Pacquiao in the highest grossing fight of all time. So he never got himself into that place where he earned the fight with Floyd, where he was the outstanding contender. And I just felt like after that, he kind of lost that ambition and just kind of fought those people below Thurman, Porter, Garcia, Chris Algieri, Phil LaGreco, Sammy Vargas. He was fighting people below that. And I think that's what kind of let him down. Like I said, I think the Garcia thing really knocked almost the ambition out of him in a way, in terms of fighting the people at that level, the people that are close to him. But I think he does have the better legacy. I agree with you. But I'm looking forward to it. I know it sounds silly, but I am actually looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be a good fight. And I agree. I'm not sure who I'm picking at the minute, but we shall see. But another domestic fight that's this weekend is Lyndon Arthur. I should say the A side because he won the first time. Lyndon Arthur against Anthony Yarde in the rematch from the first fight, which was sometime, it was earlier this year. I suppose the question to you, Paul, is, do you see it going any differently?
I thought you were going to say, I suppose the question is, who wins between Pat Barrett and Tunde? And I think, in the ring or on the street, my money's on Barrett, but Tunde might have some street skills we don't know about yet. But maybe that's another one at another time that they can do it for charity or something. Lyndon Arthur is unbeaten. You got to remember that. And this was a very close fight. It was a split decision. Yarde was starting to turn a screw towards the end of the fight. Was it too little, too late? These are all the different things that bring the intrigue to the rematch. But one thing throughout is Lyndon Arthur's jab was ramrod and it was on point. It had very good accuracy and it did what it needed to do in that fight. He didn't come to that fight with a massive repertoire of punches. He wasn't looking to throw the bolo punch followed by let's hook off every jab and whatever else. It wasn't like that at all. He used his jab perfectly. He brought it back to basics. It's the jab, brought it through the right as and when you need it, the uppercuts as and when you need it, and the hooks as and when you need it. It wasn't a case saying, I'll throw a punch in the hope that one of them is going to hit, and if I throw enough volume, something's going to land. No, it was a very, very clever and calculated performance from Lyndon Arthur. But the flip side to the coin is that Yarde was starting to catch up, and he seemed to be a little bit angry towards the end, and that was great because we haven't seen Yarde angry in a while, and when he gets angry, knockouts tend to happen. So be interesting to see the mentality of both the guys as they go in terms of who can win. I mean, well, the first fight was a split decision win. I had Arthur winning it by one, possibly an argument for 2 rounds, but I definitely had him winning it by 1 round. How close is the next one going to be? Who knows? Is it going to be a stoppage extravaganza? Again, who knows? It's there seems to be sort of genuine bad blood in it. It's a fight I'm really looking forward to. We've mentioned this many times before on the podcast. The light heavyweight division in Great Britain at the moment is fantastic. So many good fighters in there who can mix it up, and whoever wins this fight has got another 4 or 5 people within the UK that they can fight instantly. And whoever sort of progresses upwards could potentially be looking for a world title fight. I mean, how good would it be to hear that Lyndon Arthur is going to go against Bivol or better BF or whoever? Yeah, exciting.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is exciting. So it was just under a year ago, the first fight. They've both had little tune-up fights since then. It was around in the summer. So yeah, I thought Lyndon Arthur won the first fight by a couple of rounds at least. And he did hurt his right hand. I think it was even before the fight he hurt his right hand, but he seemed to just keep Yarde at bay with the jab and then threw in the right hand. And it seemed like Tunde didn't realise that Arthur wasn't throwing the right hand until it was too late. It felt it was about 9-10 rounds by the time he actually mentioned it. I think it might have been Richie Woodall that was saying it on commentary. He's not throwing the right hand. He's not throwing the right hand. But it took 9-10 rounds for Tunde to pick up on that and to tell him to start going in and start letting his hands go. Yeah, I think perhaps it could get really interesting if he jumps on Yarde. If Yarde jumps on him early and tries to kind of wear him down, or if he tries to just pressure him. It's hard to pick. My head is saying
this is not a fight you would bet the house on. It's a very, very close fight still. It really, really is. And all scenarios could happen in this. You could have stoppages either way. It could be a landslide points win to whoever. It could be very, very close again. It could be a draw. That's why there's so much intrigue in the fight. Two very able fighters here, two very, very good operators, and I think we could be in for a treat. Lyndon Arthur's got to show that this is not a flash in the pan from his side, and Yarde needs to show that he's back up at world level again. So yeah, one I'm really looking forward to.
Yes, no, definitely. Me too. I think it's going to be really good. I'm finding it really hard to pick somebody. I think all the way up to this, I've thought that Arthur would win. I think I'm going to stick with that. I think Arthur might win a more comfortable points decision this time. Like I said, I thought he went by at least a couple of rounds last time, and he didn't have the right hand to go with it. Although he was throwing it towards the end. He was throwing it, but perhaps not as committing to it as much as he normally would have done. So I think it's a really, really fascinating one. I'm looking forward to it. I think you're right as well. There's talk of Callum Johnson getting the Joe Smith Jr. fight, so that kind of takes him out of the equation. But there's a lot of good fighters at light heavyweight in this country. I think it's Craig Richards is at light heavy, isn't he? We've got Callum Smith's at light heavy as well in Britain. There's a lot of kind of good, Joshua Buatsi, Yarde, Rocky Fielding's around there as well. There's a lot of good kind of fighters in and around the the light heavyweight division in this country. Dan Aziz has just won the British title, and what a performance that was the other week from Dan Aziz. To stop Hosea Burton in the way he did, in the fashion he did, completely dominated him and stopped him. I think there's a lot of good fighters there in the Britain, and that's where that's what's good about the British title is the board will mandate fights that cross promotions. And I think
absolutely that was a great fight. So, I mean, I saw Dan training at the Peacock Gym recently at the new Peacock Gym, and apart from you look at his work ethic, which is absolutely incredible. I mean, what an absolutely lovely guy, and his trainer as well, Brian O'Shaughnessy. I mean, absolutely lovely man. But I remember when Dan Aziz fought against Charlie Duffield, and Charlie gave it his best, and what was stopped in, I think it was at the O2. And the both of them are mates and stuff as well. And he's everything that's right about boxing. It really is, And you can tell, like at the end of the fight, he was sort of saying, bring on whoever. It wasn't a case of I'll take on the world. It was more a case of, hey, I'm working my ass off here. If I can get a few quid from a fight, step me up a bit, then I'll do it, And if there's anyone in Britain who wants to fight me. But let's hope that he's guided to sensible sort of stepping stones now, and see how far he goes. But yeah, domestically, we're doing great. And boxing at the moment is cooking again. This time last year we were doing a podcast sort of saying, so, everything's locked down for Christmas. And let's hope I'm not jinxing on this podcast so we get something similar in this new variant. But it was in a lot worse situation last year, a lot of unknowns in terms of the pandemic. And certainly, boxing was being done behind closed doors. And that's it. We're in a different stage now, and some great fights are coming together. Boxers are starting to lock horns at top level. It's good. It's all good.
Yeah. No, it is all good. And I think we'll be fine for Christmas. I think we'll be fine. I don't want to touch wood. There's a lot to look forward to next year. I think Sky with Boxer, if they're willing to work with, Shakan Pitters, on the Mick Hennessy, he's another one that's in the mix. He just got a stoppage win over Reece Cartwright the other week on Channel 5. That was a really good fight. There's a lot of good fights at that British level, and hopefully Dan Aziz and and the winner of Lyndon Arthur and Anthony Yarde, or even the loser, is someone that's there to kind of get them all together while Callum Johnson's doing his thing and Joshua Baratzi's sadly hurt his hand again, so he's going to be out for a little while. So yeah, a lot to look forward to, really. This weekend as well, I do want to talk to you about Teofimo Lopez. We obviously spoke about it the other day, but I want to get your take on it as well. This weekend is the other, the email champion is Devin Haney against Jojo Diaz. I think that's a quietly tidy little fight. I don't know about what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I like Haney, and I think, he's 23, so, making the age comparison with Lopez here, we look at sort of maturity, etc. Haney does show sort of spurts of immaturity, the way he's on Twitter. I mean, to be honest, when Lopez lost the other day, there was a lot of fighters, Haney being one of them as well, that were basically jumping on the bandwagon and sort of going, "Oh, you're not so vocal now," or whatever everyone was saying. I'm not saying Haney said that. I'm just sort of saying in general, as there was a lot of poking at Lopez. The only person who was really humble, and he was the one that probably got the biggest pile of shit thrown at him on social media, was Josh Taylor. His dad was Lopez's dad was sort of saying, this, that, and the other, and using a few expletives to throw to Josh Taylor's way. And Taylor said something like, "Don't kick a man when he's down," sort of thing, And but Haney's, he's got 26 fights to his name. He hasn't lost anything, but there is a sort of a layer of immaturity in there. But he's world champion, and he's a very good fighter. He brings speed. He brings power to the game. He almost reminds me a bit of a young Gervonta Davis, maybe not at that level of speed and power and obviously maturity right now. But I think he can do good things. However, Joseph Diaz has only lost one fight in 34 and doesn't come up just to get a paycheck. The man, he's as tough as they come. He's only ever lost one fight, but he's never been stopped before. Yes, he doesn't contain the biggest punch in his gloves there, but he will come to make life very difficult for Haney. So if he's able to stop Diaz, he'll be the first person in 35 fights at that point to have done so. So that'll be a statement. And Diaz is only 29. It's not like we're looking at an over the hill late 30s fighter here. I think he's still got a lot in the tank. And the fight he had against Fortuna was good. He won it by unanimous decision. He looked very comfortable in there as well. So let's see what happens. That was only 5 months ago. Perfect time for him to recoup and see where he's at now. So I mean, he beat Tevin Farmer as well. He beat Fonseca. But yeah, if I have to put money on it, I'll probably say Devin Haney. How he does it is going to basically define him. But it's certainly not a walk in the park. Jojo Diaz is a good fighter.
I think this is the toughest fight of Devin Haney's career so far. He obviously fought Jorge Linares in his last fight and got wobbled quite badly right in the last seconds of the round. But this is going to be the toughest and the freshest opponent he's fought. I think Jojo Diaz. I actually saw him box in the amateurs in the Olympics. I sat right next to his sister, who's a worldie, by the way, and she was. He was. I feel like him moving to lightweight has suited him. I think he needed it. I think it maybe have come one fight too late. He obviously had to vacate his super featherweight title on the scales after missing weight and then drew the fight afterwards. So I think moving up to lightweight, he perhaps did that one fight too late, but he looks much fresher at 135, and that's why I kind of fancy. I kind of fancy him. I think he might win it. I think he might beat Haney. I think this is going to be the toughest fight of Haney's career. Haney might move him around. I think skill set where he could just move him around. But Diaz is fresh and Diaz is tested at world level, and I don't think Haney's had that testing before as much. So and I think with what we've seen this past weekend with Teofimo Lopez and some of the shocks that we've had, you just can't rule fighters out at the minute. We seem to be getting more and more shocks at the minute. Perhaps because of the long layoffs that fighters are having because of COVID, etc., and all of that. I think that's kind of throwing up a few shock results. I'm definitely looking forward to that one. Tank, I actually only just realised that Tank was fighting this weekend as well. He's got a late sub, isn't he?
Yeah, it should just be a walkover for him, to be honest. I mean, listen, it's not a case of Gervonta Davis takes anyone lightly, but he's got that much natural talent. As long as he's in on the weight and he doesn't have to cut down like absolute mad, because he can get a little bit chunky, then hey, it should be a absolute walk in the park for him.
Yeah, because he had his last fight at 140, wasn't it? His last one, it was against Barrios, wasn't it? It was against Mario Barrios, and that was at 140, and now he's back down to 35, which I think suits him, being at 135. I think that's about him. I think once you go to 140, you can't really go back to 130 again. So I think it's best for him to be. I think you're right. I think he'll walk through Isaac Cruz. Fair play to Cruz for taking it so late on, but I think he'll walk. I think he's going to walk through him. I actually think Tank walks through everybody at 135. The issue that he has is I don't think PBC and Mayweather Promotions are. I think they have complete faith in Tank. I think they're happy with Tank. I think they probably believe he walks through Haney and walks through all the others, but I think they just don't like doing business with the other promoters. And I think they're probably the worst for it. PBC. It used to be Bob Arum. I always used to label Bob Arum with that, but I think PBC now are probably the worst for that, doing business with the other promoters. And it's a shame because I think Tank.
The irony of it is that so Tank holds a WBA regular lightweight title. It's an absolute trinket. But if you put in in terms of a threesome there of Teofimo Lopez-Kambosos and Tank, I get Tank to win 99 times out of 100 against the other two. And so and it's like, it reminds me the other day when what's his name, Diamante was reading out the scores, and he was going through, and he said, he starts going through all the different titles, and it's like the WBA, the IBF, the WBC franchise, and there's going to be a lot of people that go, is the franchise one better than like the interim, or is that better? Is that like the regular WBC, or is that better than the silver? Is that better than the global? Or are you just thinking, why can't it just be the WBC? So, but anyway, 135, I agree. I believe that Tank takes Lopez-Kambosos out and anyone else at that range. But will these fights happen? Who knows? I don't think we're going to see Lopez for a few months. He justifiably needs to repair mentally and physically, maybe get rid of his dad from his camp as well. And what happens to Kambosos Jr. next? Well, if you're in his camp, you want him to get the biggest fight with the biggest money. This is no difference to Ruiz Jr. when he beat Anthony Joshua. And he went in there as a last-minute replacement, and not this was a last-minute replacement, but he got paid chicken shit for money, and then ends up by being like a $23 million paycheck person afterwards. Kambosos obviously not going to get that at this sort of weight level, but he should get a tidy few million with all the belts he's got there, and the shock that he's given the world in terms of Lopez. But if he goes in against Gervonta Davis, which you never know, it could be a possibility.
Possible. The
reality is he's probably gonna get stopped, and that's it. So, but again, more intrigue in the 135 department, more intrigue in the world of boxing, and as it highlights again, boxing is back, and it's got us all talking again.
Definitely, yeah. I think I never thought of that. I think Tank has got a shot because he's promoted by Lou DiBella, George Kambosos. Who's done a lot of business with PBC before. I think that's a possibility. I think that is a possibility that Tank gets the Kambosos fight instead of Haney, or the winner of Haney, Jojo Diaz. I said this on Sunday's pod. If I was Teofimo Lopez, I would have told the WBC to go fuck their belt. After they did that business with Devin Haney, I would have said, you know what, bollocks, you can have the belt. I'm the champion. And that's why we have the lineage. People talk about lineal championships and it's for nerds and all that sort of stuff. The lineal champion is the champion, and that's George Kambosos Jr. Everyone else are pretenders. And Doug Fisher from Ring Magazine said something. We always talk about, fighters, this guy would beat this guy would beat that guy. We have to fight the fights. And this is why we fight the fights. This is why we talk about Kambosos and Teofimo Lopez. Oh, it doesn't matter who would have won. Get them in the ring and have the fights, and we know who will win. So fair play to Kambosos. How did you must have loved that fight, right?
Yeah, I thought, listen, it was a great fight. I think today I made a comment on Twitter saying something like I can't remember who it was, whether it was ESPN or someone like that. It was a big name that made a statement on Twitter saying, is he the greatest Australian fighter of all time? And I thought, this has obviously got to be written by the casual who normally does the cricket or something, and suddenly been given the boxing Twitter handle for 10 minutes and decided to make a comment like that, because that's just stupid. Jeff Fennick, a multi-weight world champion who fought an incredible list of champions. Kambosos could go on to be something extraordinary. He genuinely could. He's 28 years old, so it's quite late in the day. He's probably just done the biggest upset of any Australian boxer. That's what I would say, and that's what I think I said on Twitter. And I take my hat off to him the way he fought Lopez. He went out there from that first round, mentally, he was ahead of him. When he caught him with that right hand and put him on his ass, at the end of the round, he started giving him verbals, and he was doing that at the end of most rounds and in the ring as well. He'd already beaten him mentally at that point. That's round one, not even finished. And then he started to work out the timing of Lopez's punches and was doing some beautiful counter work. Lopez started to get a bit of traction back and started to do a bit of the same. And it became a closer fight towards the end. But I had Kambosos winning. Yeah, absolutely. As I've watched it about 3 times the fight, and there's no way that I can see that Lopez ever won it. Certainly not 10-2 in terms of the comment he'd made on there. But we have to remember this, that it's like a game of conkers. People say, okay, so Lopez beat the guy who had all the conkers, which was Lomachenko, so that makes him better than Lomachenko. No, it doesn't. It means that he beat a guy who'd already had a fairly tough paper round since he turned professional, was in a weight division which was higher than he normally would have probably preferred to have fought at, but that's where the money was. And now he's starting to defend his, and Lopez is now starting to defend his title. So hats off to Lopez for beating Lomachenko, of course, at that age as well. And this is all part of the process. You've got to go on and defend your title against all comers. And unfortunately, Kambosos was the banana skin. And is this going to be a case of Lopez is now going to turn into the Buster Douglas where he can't get himself back into a championship position again? Because if he decides to say fight against the only other person out there at the moment, like we said, having the WBA title in terms of Tank, that's not going to end well for him, I don't think. And so he can claw his way back. The obvious thing would be to do a rematch, but apparently there's no rematch clause in there because they didn't think that Kambosos would make it past round 1. So, it was a great fight. I really, really enjoyed it. It's one of those ones that if people woke up in the morning and they went onto the internet and started to check the result, and this is a Kambosos beats Lopez, everyone would be like, I think it was a 13-1 betting odd for Kambosos to win. So if you stuck a ton on there, you'd have come back with 1,300 quid. It's fair play to him. I hope that he's able to milk those belts for as much as he possibly can. He deserves every single cent that he can get from there, he can generate from there. I also sincerely hope that Lopez is able to mentally come back from it. Hopefully, physically, he hasn't had anything too bad. Someone had mentioned on the internet that he was in ICU or something. Hopefully, he's really not in ICU still now because that's a fair few days afterwards. But either way, mentally, physically, I hope that Lopez gets back in the action because he's been brilliant up to this point. And who knows what happens from here on? You never know. Lomachenko might have been looking at it, licking his lips, thinking, you know what, I might be able to do something here. You got Lee Selby, who, Kambosos beat him by split decision about a year back, wasn't it? And he's now thinking, hey, I can do this guy. I've got faster feet than him, So there's all sorts of intrigue out there. There's all sorts of intrigue.
There is. I tweeted, Sunday morning, I hope Lee Selby doesn't watch this fight and think I've got one more run in me, because I thought Kambosos beat him handily over in London not too long ago. I don't want to see him box again. I think he jumped to lightweight because he was dying at featherweight, and to jump 2 divisions is always a warning sign for me. I don't want to see him box again, Selby. I really hope Selby doesn't see that. I think, I can be world champion. That was close. That was a split decision. It wasn't. He lost. He lost comfortably on home territory-ish. Kambosos wants to fight in Australia next. He's saying, I want to fight in Australia. I don't want to come. I've done everybody else's backyard. I want to fight in Australia. And it's just about who is going to be willing to go over there or who's going to offer him enough money. Tank is the biggest draw in the division. He's the biggest pay-per-view draw in the division. He's actually the only pay-per-view draw in the division. So I think there's going to be that. I think Tank is in pole position if he comes through Saturday. There's obviously Haney as well. I think lightweight's an exciting division. I'd like to see Tank get the fight because I think he's too good to be treading water at PBC. I think, and fighting whoever it is they can find for him. I want to see him get into a proper fight, even if he has to go to Australia. Because I think even if he fights in Australia, I think he'll stop Kambosos. Imagine that reaction. Oof. Oh,
Yeah, I
people.
mean, there's a few little hurdles that might stop that. Firstly, anybody looking to fight in New Zealand or Australia at the moment, if they hear that their pet cockroach has got a sore throat, then that's it. The entire borderline is sort of cut down, which is why obviously they've got such incredible statistics out there, because they have these extreme measures in terms of coronavirus. But the way things currently stand, no one would be able to go out in Australia, I think, and fight for the foreseeable sort of a few weeks, especially with the new variant, etc. But again, coming back to comparison of Jeff Fennick, Jeff Fennick was, I think it was like certainly a 3-weight world champion, and he fought against some incredible guys. The fights he had against Azuma Nelson, etc. But over 90% of his fights were all in Australia, and that's why I think he'll always be their big hero. And I certainly believe it's like with Jeff Horn when he fought against Manny Pacquiao and he did it in Australia. I mean, that was just like sensational. That would have been if you were at that fight, you came out there afterwards, you'd certainly be calling up work and saying, "Hey, I'm not coming in tomorrow. I'm going to be straight. I've just seen Jeff Horn beat Pacquiao, and I'm going to be pretty out of it for the next 2 days celebrating." I think if Kambosos gets a big name when it comes to Australia, however big an arena or stadium they have, they will need to get a hold of that, because everyone will be behind this guy. They really will.
Yeah, they will. And I think over in Australia, it's one of those places you're going to need a knockout to get a draw. Like their judges will, the crowd, any shot that grazes the opponent is going to be cheered to the rafters, because they're going to be that mad for it. I have to pat myself on the back, Paul, because you know what I'm going to say. At the start of the year, I asked everyone for their big kind of predictions, and I said Teofimo Lopez loses a fight this year. And the reason I said that was, and I said it at the time, fair play to him for beating Lomachenko, but Lomachenko looked like an old fighter in there. Particularly for the first 6-7 rounds, he barely threw a punch. And I felt that the win, while it was a great win, I felt like it flattered him a bit. And so I thought, with his mad dad and everything else, I thought he would lose a fight. And I ended up being quite lucky, and he ended up losing a fight which got delayed a million times, and it seems like he'd outgrew the weight. In terms of comparisons, in terms of upsets, do you think the Horn beating Pacquiao is a bigger upset than Kambosos, or historically?
No, I think Kambosos beating Lopez is bigger. Pacquiao was sort of knocking on in years at that point, and it's not that it was a shadow, because he went on to then still have a few good fights in him, but it was an old man in there with a younger guy, and Kambosos against Lopez, it was two guys in their 20s, one at one end of the 20s, one at the other. But I think it's more just due to the fact that Lopez beat the man, and as a result, you want to beat the man who beat the man, and that's why it was a bigger upset. He went in there as the massive underdog, and I think Kambosos played it well in the presses leading up to it as well. He wasn't taking any shit from Lopez, and there was a lot of shit coming Lopez to Kambosos' way, to his whole team there. But he did it in a way where although he was giving it back, he still seemed calm. That's maybe those extra 5 years of maturity in there. So yeah, listen, you can't expect everyone to be a Sean Porter at press conferences and always be well behaved and loved by everyone, but thought Kambosos played the mind game very well, and you could tell straight after the fight as well, the real version of him, which is he's actually a really nice guy,
What did you think of Lopez's reaction?
Where do we start? I mean, crikey, if this suddenly turned into a psychoanalysis episode, I think we could go on for a few hours. It's coming back to what I said before, in terms of how he repairs from here on is essential. Straight after the fight, the various comments, and if you look at when the scores are being read out, and he's looking around after the first one's been given to Kambosos, he's shaking his head and whatever else. He's shaking his head, and his face is swelled to hell. He's got this massive cut over it, and Kambosos is kind of staying nice and sort of calm, thinking, well, I'm away from home here. Anything can happen. I'm probably going to lose it by a couple of rounds, or I might actually just do this and win it justifiably, as I think I've boxed better. But Lopez, I don't know if it's his team around him saying you've won it, you've won it. But the reaction was atrocious. The 10-2 thing as well, saying that he'd won it by 10-2. I mean, seriously? I mean, what fight was he watching? Did he have an out-of-body experience and was watching another fight? Because there's no way ever that had been 10-2. feel a bit sorry for him, if I have to admit. Who he turns to now in terms of who to confide with. His dad's obviously doesn't seem to be the best role model to be sort of checking in with, you know. He needs to speak to like an Andre Ward or Lennox Lewis, people that can sort of bring it down to grassroots and say, hey, this is how you rebuild yourself. I mean, Andre Ward's never had to rebuild himself, but in terms of listening to a voice of reason, you know. So where Lopez goes from here, I don't know, but how he does it, I hope he does it safely and healthily.
Yeah, he's talking about moving up to 140 to fight Josh Taylor. I think he'll need a win at 140 just so he's a credible challenger. You can't come off a loss at 135 and then move up to fight Josh Taylor at 140 and think that's going to sell. Like you got to win a fight at 140. Some talk about Regis Prograis at 140. That's a great fight. Prograis a hell of a fighter, and that fight with Josh Taylor was very, very close over in London. I was there at London, had a pretty good view of it. I don't understand the 10-2 thing, because you see Teofimo Lopez sit down after that 7th round. He looks disheartened. He looks completely disheartened. He looks like he's frustrated. He looks like he doesn't have any ideas. The corner advice he got was awful from his dad. They obviously sacked the co-trainer that was part of the Lomachenko win. So they didn't have him, someone with a little bit more world championship experience. I think he was let down. And I said this on the pod the other day, but I'll say it again. I think he was let down by his corner. I think he was let down by his dad particularly. And I think he needs to have a look at that. And I think just like Chris Eubank Jr., you need to have that experienced guy in the corner that's been there and done it, not just your dad, someone else, another voice. And maybe that's what he needs. Maybe dad needs to, maybe dad should do the because dad said, oh, well, he wasn't prepared right. Well, that's on you because you're his trainer. It's for you to get him on weight and get him on weight safely. Don't say, oh, we've outgrown the weight. But he did, to be fair, he did say afterwards, I kept him at 135 for one fight too long. It's important that he that. But I think it'll be interesting to see, but I think he needs a win. He can't go in with Josh Taylor without a win. He needs a win first. It's been too long since that Lomachenko fight and too much time for people to look at it the way I look at it, which is like, well, he didn't look great, Lomachenko. So it's interesting. We shall see. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to get your kind of viewpoint on where Terence Crawford goes next, because since we last spoke, he's boxed as well. He boxed Sean Porter. We spoke about that the other day, but I'm also interested in your viewpoint on it. Just quickly on what you think Crawford does next and how you think he looked the other week.
I'll just say I could look at Terence Crawford boxing all day, all night. I think the way he fought against Sean Porter, who's a very good fighter, he took some hard shots from Porter. Porter did have a success sort of midway through the fight. Even around 8, he seemed to be landing some beautiful right hands. But Crawford's got a great way of computing information and working out very quickly the traps that are being set and how to counter those traps. The speed of his punches, the accuracy of his punches, the footwork was absolutely faultless. He's 38. I know. He's He's a 3-weight world champion, and you've got to remember that when he was fighting against the likes of crikey, even Breeders' Prescott back in 2013. But when he fought against Ricky Burns, I remember in Glasgow, that was a very rusted version, not rusty, but rusted version, as in that he was still sort of coming out of this beautiful chrome version that we have of him now. It's that lovely polished version, and he seems to be getting better and better. Where he goes from now, the fight we all want to see him in is against Errol Spence Jr. Based on his recent performances, I'd have to put money to say that Crawford would win that. That's the only fight I would like to see right now. Obviously, there's other ones out there, and there's people up and coming, the likes of Virgil Ortiz Jr. But in terms of the fight, that'll be the one. Why it wouldn't happen, I think we've mentioned it before, all to do with the promoters. Yeah,
it seems like he's going to make himself a free agent, which means hopefully he can, sign something with PBC for 1 or 2 fight deal. Spence needs a comeback fight after the eye surgery. He's going to need something just to get him back into it. And I asked this question of the guys the other day, and we all agreed that Terence Crawford would win. And so you're saying, say Spence comes for a fight, he looks fine, the eye surgery's fine, just like after the Danny Garcia fight, he looked brilliant. If he looks back to his old self and he looks fine, You'd pick Crawford still?
I'd still pick Crawford. His footwork is what would win it for him, and Spence Jr. he throws his punches conservatively, and he's got a very, very accurate hit rate. But Crawford he's got a great way of setting traps. He's very light on his feet at 147, and I think that he would. I think he'd win it on points. We're not looking at I don't think he'd stop Errol Spence Jr. But that's the best at 147. That would bring out the best fighter in that division. But at the moment, hey, listen, Terence Crawford is just sensational. You've got to wonder as well, how long can he continue to carry on at this sort of level? He's 34 years old as well, 34 years old, 38 fights, no losses, no draws, and he was floating around that ring with the utmost ease against a very good fighter in Sean Porter. So, bring on Errol Spence Jr. Please, everybody who's involved with that, make it happen.
It is absolutely. If Spence comes through a fight and he looks just like he did before after the Garcia fight, it really is one of those fights where you'll change your mind 2 or 3 times before it happens about who's going to win. Spence's body work, I think that's probably when I was ringside for the Brook fight, and that was the thing that I took away from it that night was his body attack. He's relentless. A lot of fighters, they don't. You have to be so disciplined to not go headhunting, and that's one of Spence's best, one of his best kind of attributes is that yes, he's strong, yes, he's a puncher, yes, he's got nice feet and everything else, but he's so relentless with his body attack, and if he's able to cut the ring off and get to Crawford's body, he could get him out of there. I would pick Spence to stop Crawford, but not the other way around, just because of a size factor of it. But it's and Crawford has. You said you think he's getting better. I'm not sure about that. I think there are small cracks starting to show with Crawford. He's still a brilliant fighter, and gun to my head, I'd pick him to beat Spence. But I think we are starting to see small signs of slippage. But the elite fighters at this age have always been able to adapt to where they're slowing down, and I think Crawford is starting to do that. He's starting to find ways to adapt to perhaps attributes not being as sharp as they were. But it's a brilliant fight, and hopefully it gets made sometime next year. That will do, Paul. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. It's been really good talking to you, and hopefully I'll have a chat with you soon.
No, sounds good, Cal. And I know we're only at the end of November, but by the time this podcast goes live, we're in December. So let's start those Merry Christmas celebrations, everybody. Be good.
Yes. Be good. Have fun. Be safe. I'm looking forward to Christmas. I love it. I love Christmas. It's just about seeing people. It's seeing the people that you don't get to see all year round, whether it's family, whether it's friends. Seeing those people and eating lots of food and watching I always like to watch old fights on Boxing Day. I'll put on Lewis Rackman 2 or whatever, Mayweather Canelo or Gatti Ward for the 17th time. That's my Boxing Day tradition, as well as the sales. So it'll be good fun. I'm looking forward to it. All right, thank you, Paul.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, take care.